Welcome to The Great Game. My name is Mikkel Rosenvold and this is my weekly geopolitical editorial. This week we're obviously putting a lot of focus on the Middle East. Saturday saw a massive retaliatory strike from Iran against Israel, as we've been talking about for weeks. Here's my take on the strike and what comes next. First of all, the attack was massive in scale. The attack was retaliatory after the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, which took out only a few Republican Guard generals of Iran. And the Iranian response to Israel was anticipated to be sort of a tit for tat. In my opinion, this was the case. There were incredibly no casualties on the Israeli side, only very, very few injured, some concussions. So we must conclude that, first and foremost, Israel defended really well against these attacks. They managed to shoot down more than 99% of the incoming drones and missiles, but perhaps also some further points. Iran's attack consisted of several hundred drones and missiles coming in waves over Israel. These kind of attacks have been developed in conjunction with Russia, who've been using them liberally against Ukraine. When the Russians use these kind of swarm attacks against Ukraine, usually the Ukrainians manage to shoot down between 40 to 60% of the incoming drones and missiles. However, we and Iran knows full well that Israel is much better protected against these sort of strikes than the entire Ukrainian front line. And furthermore, that these missiles and drones would have to travel across several neighboring countries, Iraq, Syria, or Jordan, or Saudi Arabia. So Israel would have even more time to prepare for this. Furthermore, they were backed directly by the navies of US, the UK, and France. So it was no surprise, and it can have been a surprise to Iran, that Israel managed to shoot down more than 95% of these drones and missiles. That leads me to conclude that Iran knew that this would be large in size, but relatively harmless in effect. Another point to that is that Iran didn't include any air force or ground components in this attack. That wouldn't really have been logical, but they could have chosen to include proxy groups to make land attacks from Lebanon or elsewhere. This leads me to the conclusion that Iran knew that this would be an attack that would allow them to save face. They have responded to Israeli aggression, but they have done so without taking any Israeli lives, which makes it a really tough dilemma for Israel whether to attack back. And that's a point in itself. The US obviously took this attack very seriously. President Biden was in the Situation Room with all his advisors, but the US very clearly had the same reading of the Iranian attack as I do. This was de-escalatory, or at least non-escalatory. It was a tit-for-tat response, and now it's up to Israel whether they want to engage in further attacks. The sheer size of the Iranian attack, the number of drones and missiles, might provoke the Israelis to strike back, to signal that this is unacceptable in the future. On the other hand, there is little internal pressure in Israel for a strong response, simply because no one was killed. What's next in this conflict? Well, I believe this pretty much ends the cycle of violence. I won't rule out that Israel may strike in retaliation of the Iranian attack, but I expect that to be relatively minor strikes, perhaps directed at Republican Guard bases or perhaps Iranian missile factories, some sort of sabotage attacks. And I definitely don't expect Iran to respond in force to that. So, don't listen to the hysteria, no World War III, no wider Middle Eastern war, just as we predicted a week ago. Our final point of this great game is a little look at some perhaps promising news out of the Red Sea crisis. Obviously, we're closing on 5 months of stopped travel of global shipping lines through the Red Sea Suez route, which has led global shipping to be redirected either south of Africa or through the Pacific and on rail through America. As I've mentioned before, I see one major solution, which is a peace deal for Gaza. The conflict between Israel and Palestine is the casus belli for the Houthis to attack ships. And whenever a peace is struck there, they will find a hard time to really convince their followers that they need to keep attacking global shipping. I've been very optimistic about a peace deal a few weeks ago. I was famously wrong about that. But a new solution may have approached or appeared. The US seemed to be in more or less direct negotiation with the Houthis over some sort of deal that would allow shipping to return. The US have even opened for removing Houthis from their terrorist list. This is almost unheard of. The terrorist list is key to US international counterterrorism efforts, and it's unheard of that the US would negotiate with pulling groups off this terror list simply to gain some leverage. But it seems that the US is growing more desperate to have shipping return to the Red Sea Suez route to get goods flowing from China to Europe and to the US East Coast, that this may actually be a step that they're willing to take. This, in my opinion, opens up another path to a resolution of this crisis, and I'm still hopeful that we will see shipping return to the Red Sea Suez route before summer. However, it's really tough to say. Those were my two main topics of this week. Please get in touch with us if you want any more content like this. We're happy to engage in calls and Q&A sessions on this, since it's a very hot topic for markets as well right now. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for a great game. Thank you for watching.